Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper. France has been hit by multiple acts of terrorism. In the French city of Nice, an individual carrying a knife has attacked a group of people near a church, resulting in the death of 3 innocent people. Another attempted attack using a gun has been reported in other French cities as well. Along with this, there has also been an attack at the French consulate in Saudi Arabia. So these acts of violence have been labelled as a terror attack by the French government, and it has placed France in a conflict with a number of Muslim majority countries. See, this topic is no doubt highly sensitive and controversial, but as UPSC aspirants, let's approach the issue in a very neutral manner and discuss the key issues at hand by staying away from the controversy. But first, let's look at the background. See, there is a satirical weekly newspaper in France known as Charlie Hebdo, and it is known for publishing satirical cartoons on several issues which usually lead to a major controversy. So a few years ago, Charlie Hebdo had published a cartoon in its newspaper that carried a caricature of Prophet Muhammad, and this reportedly offended a number of Muslims around the world as it hurt their religious sentiments. So after the publication of this controversial cartoon on Prophet Muhammad by Charlie Hebdo, a call was given by a number of radical organizations to target the newspaper's headquarters in Paris. Eventually, this led to a major terror attack in 2015, in which a number of innocent people were killed near the Charlie Hebdo office. Reportedly, this attack was carried out by terrorists belonging to the Al-Qaeda, and it highlighted the fact that France is not new to witnessing acts of terrorism. Available data shows that in just the last 8 years, France has witnessed nearly 37 terror attacks in which nearly 200 innocent people have been killed. Most of these attacks have not been large-scale, well-organized attacks. Instead, they have been carried out by lone wolves who are operating on their own after getting self-radicalized, or they have been carried out by small modules that have affiliations with terror groups such as Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. So this makes France one of the major victims of jihadist terror in Europe. Now, 5 years later, the Charlie Hebdo incident has been triggered again, and it has led to a series of attacks in France. Just a few weeks ago, in October 2020, a radical jihadist beheaded a school teacher for displaying this controversial cartoon to school students. This horrific incident of beheading invited a strong response from the French government, and the French President Emmanuel Macron labelled this incident as a terror attack, and he launched a personal attack against radical organizations in the country. So after labelling the incident as a terror attack, the French president and his government took a firm stand against radical extremism and extended complete support to the freedom of speech of Charlie Hebdo to publish these cartoons. Along with this, the French president stated that Islam as a religion is in crisis, and he called for the reform of Islam, and he has even proposed to bring in a law to regulate religious activities and Islamic organizations in the country. While making these controversial statements, the French president called for reforming Islam in the country, and this naturally triggered a major backlash in a number of Muslim majority countries. This backlash has resulted in widespread protests in a number of countries, including Bangladesh, Pakistan, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, etc. There has also been a massive backlash against the French government on social media platforms as well. And now, a few days later, a fresh wave of attacks have taken place in the city of Nice and other French cities. And even French embassies and consulates around the world have come under threat after this attack in Saudi Arabia at the French consulate. And a few countries have even given a call to boycott goods that have been produced by French companies. So the core issue over here is the conflict between French ideals and religious fundamentalism. See, first and foremost, let me clarify that religious fundamentalism is not limited to any particular religion. In fact, we can find religious extremism and fundamentalism in almost all religions of the world. Because in every religion, you have certain extremist elements who conveniently misinterpret their religion for propagating conservative and fundamentalist ideas in order to promote turmoil and discord in the society so that they can reap the political benefits that arises out of such polarization. Here, let me take the liberty to point out a few radical strains in each religion. In Islam, you have the radical Salafists who propagate jihad. In Christianity, you have the white supremacists who assert their neo-Nazi principles. In Hinduism, you have several fringe outfits that promote extremist and fundamentalist ideologies. And even in Sikhism and Buddhism, you have the Khalistan movement and the Buddhist radicals who have targeted the Rohingya minority in Myanmar and the Tamils in Sri Lanka, respectively. Even within Jews, you have an ultra-conservative sect that repeatedly targets Palestinians and other Muslims of the region. So as you can see, no religion is free from its own version of extremism and fundamentalism. But at the same time, one needs to remember that acts of terrorism has no religion. Just because a few radical elements are carrying out such acts of terrorism, you can't label the entire religion or the entire religious community as a security threat. It is the vested interests in each religion who are deliberately misinterpreting their religion for their own selfish political and ideological needs. But that being said, hurt religious sentiments can never be used as an excuse to justify the usage of violence, acts of terrorism, and killings of innocent people. So it is in this context that we need to label all such violent acts inspired by religious extremism as acts of terrorism. Be it last year's attack on a mosque at Christchurch in New Zealand, which was carried out by a white supremacist, or be it the Easter Sunday attacks carried out across churches in Sri Lanka by a terror group that was affiliated to the ISIS, or be it the latest series of attacks in France being carried out by jihadist elements. They all need to be equally condemned and they need to be labeled as acts of terrorism. So these violent acts of terrorism that France has witnessed runs into a direct conflict with the French ideals of liberty, equality and fraternity that was inspired by the French Revolution, which in turn has also inspired the preamble to the Indian Constitution as well. The French have always given a very high priority to these ideals, that is constitutional ideals, and they have championed the cause of freedom of speech and expression, freedom of thought, equality of religion, and more importantly, a strict version of secularism which clearly separates the church from the state. And under this hard interpretation of secularism, the French government and the French society has never tolerated any form of religious fundamentalism and extremism. In general, the French people, the French state, and the French constitution has always taken a firm stand against all forms of religious extremism and fundamentalism, irrespective of the religion that it originates from. But however, in the current context, the targeting of radical jihad by the French government has led to allegations of Islamophobia, and it is being alleged that the French government is targeting the entire Muslim community in France for the acts of violence being committed by a few radical elements. As we discussed earlier, terrorism has no religion, and an entire community cannot be blamed for it for the acts of violence committed by a few radical extremists. But however, the ongoing developments in France and around the world opens up a crucial debate between constitutional ideals such as liberty, equality, fraternity, freedom of speech, equality and freedom of religion, and more importantly secularism, and the need to combat all forms of religious extremism and fundamentalism. Then a related article on page number 13 provides more details about these attacks witnessed in France in response to the statements made by the French president and the policy that the French government is pursuing in order to contain radical extremism in the country. So in response to these challenges being faced by the French government, it is very important to understand what has been the stand of the Indian government on this matter. In response to these attacks and protests against France, the Indian government has come out in strong support of the French government, and it has publicly condemned these violent incidents by labeling them as a terror attack. In fact, Prime Minister Modi himself has posted on various social media platforms condemning these acts of terrorism, and he has expressed complete sympathy to the French people and complete Indian support to the French government. Officially, the Ministry of External Affairs has taken a similar stand, and interestingly, India has openly criticized the personal attack on the French president that has been unleashed by a few Muslim majority countries such as Turkey and Pakistan. So as you can see, this is not just a religious issue or a religious conflict, but it is more of a geopolitical issue, and it is no secret that Turkey and Pakistan are not in India's good books. These statements of India come at a time when India's Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan Shringla is on a visit to France in order to further strengthen the strategic partnership between the two countries. Traditionally, India and France have shared a very close strategic relationship, and they have always cooperated in the field of counter-terrorism, intelligence sharing, defense cooperation, joint military exercises, and of late, they have even begun to synchronize their Indo-Pacific strategy as well. To understand the extent of defense cooperation and strategic partnership, just take a look at the kind of defense platforms that France has provided for India. This includes the Mirage 2000 fighter jet and the Rafale fighter jet, and as well as the Scorpene diesel electric submarines. Along with this, France has consistently supported India at various international platforms, and it was one of the very few countries in the world which supported India's nuclear tests at Pokhran, and unlike the other Western countries, it did not criticize India's nuclear tests. Then along with this, France has consistently supported India's membership of the NSG, and as well as India's entry into an expanded UN Security Council. So this just goes on to highlight the extent of strategic closeness between India and France, and this explains the firm support that India has extended to France during this time of crisis. Then to secure French interests in India from any possible terror attacks, the Indian government has stepped up security at the French embassy in New Delhi and as well as at all the French consulates in Mumbai, Bengaluru, Kolkata and Puducherry. Next, another article on page number 13 explains how this crisis has turned into a geopolitical conflict between Turkey and France. See, as the French President Emmanuel Macron was facing a backlash from a number of Muslim countries around the world, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan unleashed a personal attack against the French President. Turkey has even followed this up with a call for boycott of all French goods, and this has clearly exposed the divide in the Turkey-France relationship, even though both happen to be key members of the NATO grouping. So this open attack of the Turkish president against the French president is an outcome of the ongoing geopolitical conflict between Turkey and France. See, on one hand, France being a leading power of the European Union, it is trying to reassert its military posture in the region, and President Macron has been trying to establish the dominance of France in the European region. This runs counter to the revivalist ideology of Turkish President Erdogan, because under him, Turkey has slowly turned authoritative and more conservative from being a secular liberal country, and Erdogan has been actively pursuing the expansionist policies of the Ottoman Empire, and his foreign policy is being referred to as the Neo-Ottoman policy. As a part of this strategy of Erdogan to consolidate his image in the Muslim world and to establish Turkey as a leading Muslim power, the Erdogan government has been trying to champion the cause of the Muslims around the world by openly countering other leading Muslim countries such as Saudi Arabia and Iran. This is what explains Turkey's support to Pakistan with regard to the Kashmir dispute and as well as with regard to India's Citizenship Amendment Act. So this expansionist and revivalist strategy of Erdogan places him in direct conflict with France, and this geopolitical conflict has been playing out across multiple locations in Africa and Europe. Take for example Libya. In Libya, both Turkey and France have been traditional powers. Currently in Libya, which has fallen into a state of civil war, you have a government based out of Tripoli that is backed by the government of Turkey. But contrary to Turkey's position, the French government has been backing a parallel government based out of Tobruk, and it has also extended support to the military campaign that is being waged by General Khalifa Haftar against the Turkey-backed government based out of Tripoli. Then recently, in the Eastern Mediterranean, a direct tussle has emerged between Turkey and France. Over the last few months, we have discussed the recent discovery of oil and gas in the Eastern Mediterranean and how the plan to exploit these hydrocarbon resources in the Eastern Mediterranean has turned into a geopolitical conflict between Turkey and Greece and Cyprus. Turkey has raised claims over the exclusive economic zone that essentially belongs to Greece and Cyprus, and these countries had even entered into a military standoff over this issue. While this crisis was escalating in the Eastern Mediterranean, France deployed its own naval warships, and as a leading power of the European Union, France directly threatened Turkey to maintain status quo in the region and not violate the sovereignty and territorial integrity of countries such as Greece and Cyprus. Then even with regard to the ongoing conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, a divide has emerged between France and Turkey. Because Turkey has been a traditional ally of Azerbaijan, and when the conflict broke out over the Nagorno-Karabakh region, Turkey immediately extended support to Azerbaijan. And in response, France criticized the Turkish government for unilaterally supporting just one party in the conflict, which has further increased instability in the peripheries of Europe. So it is no wonder that as soon as the latest crisis emerged in France, the Turkish president unleashed a direct attack against the French president. And this explains the geopolitical roots of this ongoing conflict between Turkey and France. Now let's take up a column from page number 6, written by former diplomat Rakesh Sood, in which he evaluates how the India-US defense partnership has deepened over the years. See, during the Cold War era, due to ideological differences, India and US hardly had any defense partnership, and in fact, their relationship even turned very hostile towards each other, especially from 1971, that is from the liberation of Bangladesh war. Prior to that, India's outreach towards the US was always stuck in labels such as the non-aligned movement and the principle of strategic autonomy. During the initial decades of the Cold War, India championed the Third World through the non-aligned movement, and it decided to firmly stay away from both the power blocs, that is the United States and the Soviet Union. And often, India would confuse its principle of strategic autonomy with non-alignment, and in the name of retaining its independence in foreign policy making, it was opting for non-alignment even at the cost of affecting its own interests. But 1971 and the liberation of Bangladesh war was a turning point, because when the United States turned hostile towards India in favor of Pakistan, India abandoned its non-aligned approach and immediately sided with the Soviet Union by signing the landmark 1971 Treaty of Peace and Friendship. So this made any defense relations between India and US impossible during the 1970s. And then through the 1980s, India would firmly stick on to its principle of non-alignment by mixing it up with the principle of strategic autonomy. Finally, a breakthrough in the India-US defense relationship came out in the 1990s with the Kick Lighter proposals. Under these proposals, US military commanders proposed enhanced defense cooperation with Indian armed forces, and as a result, in 1995, an agreed minute on defense cooperation was signed between India and the US. This agreement on defense cooperation allowed for the establishment of dialogue at the level of defense secretaries, and it also provided for the establishment of a technology group to promote defense cooperation and defense trade. But however, throughout the 1990s, India-US defense relations wouldn't improve significantly, primarily because of the shadow cast by India's nuclear weapons program and its testing of nuclear weapons in 1998 at Pokhran. The United States was firmly opposed to India's nuclear weapons program, and throughout the 1990s, it kept on exerting diplomatic pressure against India in order to keep India away from carrying out nuclear tests. But after India took the US by surprise in 1998, the United States immediately responded by tying up with other Western countries and imposed economic sanctions against India. So this would not only hurt the Indian economy, especially the science and technology sector, but it also affected the nature of defense and strategic relations between India and the US. A final breakthrough came after the 9/11 attacks, and due to changing geopolitical circumstances in South Asia, mainly because of terrorism that emanated from the AfPak region, India and US slowly started to align with each other, and through hard negotiations, these economic sanctions were completely lifted in a gradual manner by 2005. And as the sanctions were lifted, a new era began in the India-US defense relationship, and a framework for defense relationship was signed, which has provided for an institutional mechanism to promote defense cooperation between the armed forces of the two sides. This framework agreement has even been renewed in 2015, and it provides for a structured mechanism for cooperation in the field of joint military exercises, intelligence exchange, joint training, especially with regard to multinational operations. It also includes cooperation in the field of HADR assistance, that is humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, as well as technology transfer and sharing of non-proliferation best practices. Then to take this defense cooperation further, in 2013, a joint declaration on defense cooperation was also issued. But the real breakthrough in the India-US strategic defense relationship came out in 2008 when both the countries signed the landmark civil nuclear deal. This ended the nuclear pariah status of India, and it gave recognition and legitimacy to India's nuclear program. As a part of this deal, the United States obtained an exemption from the Nuclear Suppliers Group for India's nuclear program, thereby allowing India to seek an entry into the world of global nuclear commerce. So this significantly improved India's strategic profile in the world, and at the same time, India's economic profile was also rising in the first decade of the 21st century. This rapid rise of the Indian economy presented tremendous economic opportunities for the US because the Indian market was a massive and lucrative market for American companies. Simultaneously, the strong Indian diaspora in the US was gaining influence, and it was able to exert its soft power over the US government, the US Congress, that is both the House of Representatives and as well as on the US Senate. So this positive influence of the diaspora in the United States led to a further shift in how India was perceived by the United States, and it helped them to understand and respect each other's differences, especially strategic differences, and build a relationship that was mutually beneficial with regard to their common interests. So this paved the way for a series of defense contracts under which the United States has provided India with the latest defense equipment, including the C-17 Globemaster, the C-130J Super Hercules, the P-8I Poseidon, the Chinook and Apache helicopters, artillery guns, drones, etc. So even as India is looking to procure advanced drones from the US, the United States helped India during this time period to gain entry into a number of export control regimes from which India had been kept away because of its nuclear weapons program. Under the India U.S. nuclear deal, the United States had committed to support India's entry into several export control regimes such as the Australia Group, the Wassenaar Arrangement, MTCR or the Missile Technology Control Regime, and finally the Nuclear Suppliers Group. Over the last few years, India has managed to gain entry into the Australia Group, the Wassenaar Arrangement and MTCR with US support. And despite India's attempts to enter the NSG with American support, it has not been made possible because of the blockade that has been placed by China. Then over the years, India U.S. have become very close defense partners, especially after India completed the signing of all the 4 foundational agreements that are mandated by the US. Just the other day, we had spoken about the 4 foundational agreements in detail. Back in 2002, India first signed the GSOMIA that provides for sharing of military information, that is military intelligence. Then after a long gap, in 2016, the LEMOA agreement was signed that provides for the exchange of logistics, and in 2018, COMCASA was signed that provides for the supply of highly encrypted communication system from the United States to India. Then at the latest 2+2 dialogue, India has signed the last of the 4 foundational agreements, that is BECA, which provides for real-time exchange of geospatial intelligence and information. So as you can see, over the last few decades, the India-US defense relationship has completely transformed. And in fact today, both the countries have even come out with a joint strategic vision for the Indo-Pacific region in the form of the informal grouping known as Quadrilateral that seeks to openly challenge China's aggression in the Indo-Pacific region. It is quite interesting to note that India has even been invited to take part in the Five Eyes project, which is basically a signals intelligence grouping led by Australia, Canada, New Zealand, United Kingdom and the US. And in the future, if India becomes a partner to the Five Eyes project, or if it manages to exchange intelligence with the Five Eye countries, then that would be a significant boost to India's intelligence capabilities in the region. Now let's go back to an article from page number 1. The central government has set up a new commission to tackle NCR pollution. See, over the last few weeks, we have been talking about the problem of air pollution in the winter season in the Delhi NCR region. We had discussed in detail that to tackle winter air pollution in the Delhi NCR region, a body known as the EPCA or the Environment Pollution Prevention and Control Authority had been constituted on the directions of the Supreme Court, and its responsibility was to implement the Graded Response Action Plan within the Delhi NCR region in order to curb the menace of air pollution in the winter season. But in a sudden move, the central government has brought in an ordinance that dissolves the EPCA and replaces it with a permanent body that would be known as the Commission for Air Quality Management in NCR and the adjoining areas. So there are 2 important changes with regard to this new commission. One, this is a permanent body as compared to the EPCA, which was more temporary in nature because it would function only during the winter season when air pollution was at its peak. And 2, EPC's jurisdiction covered only the Delhi NCR region, whereas the new commission that has been set up, its jurisdiction extends to the adjoining areas as well, such as Punjab, Haryana, Rajasthan and Uttar Pradesh, from where several factors contribute to the menace of air pollution witnessed in the Delhi NCR region. So this new commission constituted by the centre is expected to be a very powerful body, and it will not only have the powers to levy fines, including the imposition of a jail term, but it will also have the powers to coordinate with all the state governments to enforce measures and restrictions that can help contain air pollution in the Delhi NCR region. This permanent body, which has been set up through an ordinance, will become operational and will take complete effect after obtaining the necessary approvals from the Supreme Court. As per the provisions of this ordinance, the permanent body will consist of 6 permanent members, and the chairperson shall be a former or current secretary to the Government of India or a chief secretary to a state government. And the members to this commission for air quality management in NCR and adjoining areas will be drawn from several central ministries and as well as from the concerned state governments. But the powers and jurisdiction of this new commission is expected to clash with the powers and jurisdiction of the Central Pollution Control Board and the respective state pollution control boards. Because under this setup, both would have the powers to enforce the Air Act, the Water Act and some provisions of the Environment Protection Act. So whenever such a clash occurs between the new commission and the central and state pollution control boards, it is the writ of the new commission that will prevail only in matters of air pollution. Whereas in other matters related to water pollution and other provisions of the Environment Protection Act, it is the central and state pollution control boards which will retain the required powers. See, as pointed out by experts, one of the biggest drawbacks of the EPCA, which previously administered the Graded Response Action Plan, was that there was a lack of enforcement on the ground level. So through the new ordinance, the centre has promised that we would witness a key change with regard to strict and effective enforcement of all these restrictions and measures after the Permanent Commission for Air Quality Management in NCR adjoining areas has been established. Now let's take up the practice questions for today. The index of 8 core industries is released by the Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade under the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. Option B is the right answer. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 1, the index of 8 core industries has registered the lowest decline since March. See, the index of 8 core industries is brought out by the Office of Economic Advisor under the DPIIT of the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. This index measures growth in 8 core sectors that includes coal, crude oil, natural gas, petroleum and refinery products, fertilizer, steel, cement and electricity. These 8 core sectors have been given a weightage of 40.27% in the Index of Industrial Production or IIP. In the next point, I have even shared the decreasing order of the weightage of these 8 core industries in the IIP, and kindly remember this as it can be important for prelims. The highest weightage is for petroleum refinery, then comes electricity, steel, coal, crude oil, natural gas, cement and fertilizers. The IIP or the Index of Industrial Production is a much larger index that measures growth in the economy in several sectors such as mining, electricity, manufacturing, etc. And the index of 8 core industries is one component of the IIP. The IIP, on the other hand, is brought out by the Central Statistical Organization under the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. Now let's take up the next question. Which of the following statements are correct? The Ramon Magsaysay Award is given only to individuals and organizations from Asia for transformative leadership in solving some of the most intractable problems of human development. And the second statement says that it is given out by the UNDP. Amongst the given statements, the second statement is incorrect. So option A is the right answer. See, the Ramon Magsaysay Award is given out by the Ramon Magsaysay Award Foundation, which works in coordination with the Philippines government because the award has been instituted in the memory of the former leader of Philippines, Ramon Magsaysay. Over the years, several Indians have won the award, and on page number 3, we have a small article that makes a reference to the Ramon Magsaysay Award. Now let's take up the next question. The Hirakud Dam has been built across which river? The correct answer is option D, the Mahanadi river. The Hirakud Dam is built in the state of Odisha and it was one of the first major dams built in India post-independence. Please look at this map. This is where the Hirakud Dam is located. It has been built across the Mahanadi river in Odisha. Let's take up the next question. The National Human Rights Commission of India is a constitutional body, statutory body, administrative tribunal, a court of law. The correct answer is option B. It is a statutory body because it has been set up by passing a law in 1993. It has been established through the Protection of Human Rights Act of 1993, and it fulfills India's commitments to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of the UN General Assembly. These two questions on the NHRC and the Hirakud Dam were asked because there is an article on page number 4 that makes a mention of both. See, as I mentioned, the Hirakud Dam project was one of the largest dam projects taken up post-independence, and it created a massive displacement problem. And the people who were displaced, they were supposed to be rehabilitated by the state government with the support of the center. But unfortunately, even to this day, a number of people have not received adequate compensation and rehabilitation. Hence, the matter has been taken up by the NHRC and it has issued a notice to the Odisha government. Now let's take up the next question. Cyclamate, despite its health hazard, is popularly used as an artificial sweetener. Option A is the right answer. This question has been asked because the 50 years ago article from page number 7 makes a reference to cyclamate, which is a very popular artificial sweetener being used in a variety of food products and beverages despite its health hazard. Now let's take up the next question. The city of Rajamahendravaram was associated with which kingdom or dynasty? The Cholas, Pandyas, Mysore Wadayars or the Chalukyas? The correct answer is option D, the Chalukyas, or more specifically the Eastern Chalukyas. See, Rajamahendravaram is today the official name of Rajahmundry in Andhra Pradesh. This is an important city in Andhra Pradesh that is associated with the Eastern Chalukyas, and it has been named after Raja Narendra of the Chalukya dynasty. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 8, the Andhra Pradesh State Archaeology and Museums Department is looking to establish a museum in Rajamahendravaram in order to showcase the city's medieval connect with the Chalukya dynasty and Buddhism. Now let's take up the next question. Which of the following powers does the Election Commission of India acquire during elections? Power to transfer senior government officials, deployment of Central Armed Police Forces, regulate paid news on media, or all the above? The correct answer is option D, all the above. This question has been asked in the context of the ongoing Bihar state elections, because according to this article on page number 9, the Election Commission has ordered the removal of the district magistrate and the superintendent of police of Munger after violence broke out following the administrative failure of the district authorities. Now let's take up the next question. The high-powered selection panel that selects the Chief Information Commissioner includes the Prime Minister, Chief Justice of India, Leader of Opposition to the Lok Sabha, a Union Cabinet Minister to be nominated by the Prime Minister. The correct answer is option C, 1, 3 and 4 only. And according to this article on page number 9, this high-powered selection committee has finally selected a likely candidate to be the next Chief Information Commissioner of India. Now let's take up a question from the 2018 prelims paper. The terms WannaCry, Petya, Eternal Blue, sometimes mentioned in news recently, are related to cyber attacks. Option C is the right answer. See, both WannaCry and Petya, they basically refer to a type of a ransomware which is known to encrypt the computer and lock the computer. And if you have to gain access back to your computer, you need to pay a ransom in the form of bitcoins. Reportedly, WannaCry was executed by cyber attackers from North Korea, whereas Petya was executed by Russian state agencies as a part of its cyber warfare program against Ukraine. And both the ransomwares exploited a vulnerability in the Microsoft operating system that is known as Eternal Blue, which was developed by the United States National Security Agency as a part of its cyber program to infiltrate and spy on target systems. Finally, let's take up a couple of mains practice questions. The first question, discuss the rising threat of lone wolf attacks in Europe and India's stand on the issue. The second question, the India U.S. defense partnership is deepening and has come of age. Comment. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. So this concludes our discussion for the day. Thanks for watching.